Next time you can't do it. Next time I can't, you can't. Okay.
Great, welcome back. Thanks for coming back. I hear we have a lot of people watching online. I hear we have about 100 people watching online, so that's exciting. Just want to go over briefly what we're doing with this course on understanding abortion. Our first night was the pro-choice moral. Our second night, last night, was the pro-life moral side. Tonight there's going to be a lot of dialogue back and forth between the two. And then tomorrow night we'll do the legal issue, and then the following night the very personal issue of abortion. So that's the plan. The course is based on the book Understanding Abortion, and it follows the book somewhat, so you may have to sort of shuffle around through the book. So to start off with today, I'd like again to do a quick review of what we've done so far, starting basically with that idea that I've expressed over and over, especially since I'm at a religious institution doing this workshop, that abortion is not a religious issue, that it's a human rights issue, and that's so important. It's very, very important that we start with that idea, so that, you know, that there can be people on both sides of the issue, religious people that are in favor of abortion and religious people that are against abortion. The basic pro-choice moral stand is, first of all, that only a woman can make this intimate decision, that a pregnancy takes place in her body. This is her sacred space, and only she can make that decision. It's too personal, it's too intimate for anyone else to be involved. She could share that decision with her doctor or friends or family, but ultimately it's her decision. It cannot be the public's decision. It cannot be the government's decision. It has to be her decision. Mainly and primarily because the fetus is not a person. It's not a person. We have this distinction between person and biologically human. The fetus, the embryo, going back to the zygote, it's not a person. It's biologically human only. The fetus becomes a person, or we become persons. Personhood is an achievement, something that we gradually get. We gradually get consciousness, reasoning, self-awareness, the desire to exist tomorrow. I mean, all of us have that now, but you certainly didn't have it when you were a zygote, certainly didn't have it as an embryo, certainly didn't have that as a fetus. And that's what we mean when we say personhood. That's what we mean by persons. And, you know, that's great, but even if the being in the womb is a person, and we use this term being in the womb to kind of have neutral ground at times, even if it is a person, the woman has no duty to sustain it. It's her body, it's in there, it's sort of her house. Someone comes into your house, you can throw them out whenever you like, even if you've invited them in. So even if it is a person, you can ask them to leave because it's her personal territory. It's her body that the child is in. So even if it is a child, even if you agree that it's a baby, she can expel it at any time. And every child should be a wanted child. And not only a wanted child, but it has the right to be a wanted child. Everyone has the right to be wanted. And they would include in this, every child has a right to be healthy. Every child has the right to be healthy. But you have the right to be wanted. And we all want to be wanted. We all want to be cared for, loved. And if you're going to have a life such that you're not wanted even, and you're not cared for, and you're not fed, and you're not loved, well, that's not a life worth living. That's not a life worth living. Why should you force a child to live a life like that? Well, the bottom line is a child has a right not to be forced to live a life like that. And that's a child's right. So it's better every child be a wanted child, fed, happy, etc. And if that isn't going to be the case, the child is better off not existing. So abortion helps that. Abortion is an aid to that. Women and born children in society need not just life, they need quality of life. So it's great that you're pro-life. You know, that's nice because you're educated and you're fed and you're loved and you're here and you're happy. So that's great for you to say, well, I'm pro-life, but it's not enough. There's got to be quality of life. And if there isn't quality of life, abortion is an answer to that. Abortion is an answer to that. So that's a quick run through of the pro-choice moral side. Quick review of the pro-life. Being in the womb is a baby. It's like, hold on a minute. Have you looked at the pictures? Have you seen what's going on in there? This is a baby. This is a small person. It's not just a biological organism. It's not just a biological organism. Personhood, we talk about personhood. Well, let's look at us. Look back on your life. Your life has been one continuum from conception to natural death with no radical break. Think about who you were yesterday and the day before that, and just follow those days back to when you were a little kid, and then you were a baby, and go back to the day you were born, and the day before that, the day before you were born, and follow that back to the moment of your conception. There was no natural break. There was no break. There were just cells multiplying and things happening and moving along day by day. And there was no place in there where the tooth fairy or the magic fairy suddenly came and went ding, and you became a person. You were a person all the way along. There's a continuum of life. The only difference between a born person and a preborn person is what Dr. Stephen Schwartz uses the acronym SLED for: size, level of development, degree of dependency, and your environment. Which I didn't get in the right order because I don't know how to spell SLED. So those are the differences: size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. And the interesting thing is those are the only differences that we've ever been able to come up with between a preborn person and a postborn person. And none of these are morally relevant. Your size, whether you're bigger or smaller, doesn't make you more or less of a person. Your environment, moving from the womb to outside, certainly doesn't change you into a person. Your level, your environment, your degree of, your level of development, how developed you are. Well, you're certainly more developed now, hopefully, than when you were 4, but you're not more of a person. You function differently, but you're not more of a person than you were. And your degree of dependency, well, the born baby is just about as dependent as the preborn baby. I mean, certainly the preborn baby is intimately connected to the woman's body, intimately dependent, but a born baby isn't, unless it's taken care of, isn't going to live more than about 24 hours without care. And as we age, our degree of dependency obviously changes more and more, usually for the worse. So none of these things, though, are morally relevant to whether you're a person or not. Pro-life says that pro-choice confuses functioning as a person with the being of a person. In order to function as a person, you have to first be a person. A non-person cannot start to function as a person. So if the being in the womb is just a blob of tissue can never start to function as a person. A tomato can never start to function as a person. A steak can never start to function as a person because it doesn't have the being of a person. So whatever this thing in the womb is, first and foremost, it must be a person, pro-life says, because it suddenly, at some point in time, certainly after birth, starts to function as a person. So being must be there all along. Being must be there all along. Quality of life for women, children, and society are absolutely noble goals. I mean, would anybody suggest that they are not? Absolutely noble goals. Quality of life. I mean, who doesn't want quality of life? Healthy children, well-fed children, wanted children. I mean, there's nothing worse than seeing a child, sitting on the side of the road in India or Haiti, unwanted, unloved, unfed. Of course we want quality of life, and we want quality of life for women, absolutely, and society in general, absolutely. These are great goods, but not at the expense of killing children. So pro-life says not at the expense of killing other children. You don't kill children to get quality of life for other people. In fact, you don't kill person A ever to get quality of life for person B. And to make matters worse, abortion is direct and usually painful killing of an innocent person. Direct and usually painful killing. So even though pro-choice and Planned Parenthood wants to tell us that abortion is just this gentle emptying of the uterus, a gentle emptying of the uterus, the pictures that we looked at yesterday in the life or death brochure of dismembered children tells us a different story. And that needs to be accounted for. Whether you're pro-life or pro-choice, you need to take a look at the pictures and say, is this truly the gentle emptying of the uterus? Is it? It's about, well, it's quite a while now, a good 20 years ago, I had the opportunity, as a speaker, I was asked to go to a parish in Narragansett, Rhode Island. It was a Catholic confirmation class. And they just wanted me to come in with another professor to speak about the abortion issue and prenatal life in general. And there was about 15 young people, and there were 4 adults, and they were totally out of control. But I managed to show the prenatal life slides that we took a look at last night, and started to talk about abortion. And all of these Catholic young people said, no, you're wrong about abortion. You're wrong about abortion. Women have a right to their bodies. Women have a right to abortion. And these were Catholic young people, all about 14, 15 years old. They were absolutely adamant, and they shouted me down. And I said, but look at the life pictures. Look at what this being in the womb looks like. Like, take a look at it. They said, oh, that's nice, but a woman still has a right. She has a right to have an abortion. And after about an hour and a half, 2 hours of just trying to have a dialogue within a Catholic context, I finally gave up. I was exhausted, and it was time to go home. And so the last thing I did, which is one of the last things I usually do in talks like that, was I handed out the life or death brochure. And silence. These 15 kids who wouldn't shut up for 2 hours and wouldn't let me get a word in edgewise and had told me how important it was for a woman to have a right to an abortion. It was silence. And then finally one young woman whispered, a stage whisper, and she said, nobody should do this to a baby. Nobody should do this to a baby. And all 15 of the young people agreed with her. Should have just handed this out to begin with and left. So even at that age, even though there was a right to her body, a woman had a right to her body, and nobody should force a woman to do this or that, there was still a problem that nobody should do this to a baby. So there's a problem there. There's a problem. So last night we talked about dignity, the idea that pro-life says that the being in the womb has this ontological dignity. And someone approached me afterwards and said, what do you mean by ontological dignity? So I thought maybe I better whip up a slide just to go over this briefly. And the idea, this is from Joseph Seifert from the International Academy of Philosophy in Liechtenstein and John Crosby, University of Steubenville in Ohio. The idea is that there's 4 types of dignity, and I just want to briefly. Ontological dignity is this idea that you have in your being as a person. It's rooted in the essence, the very being of a person. It's intrinsic to human nature. It's caught into your human nature. It's the basic inherent capacity or potential eventually to function as a rational being. And this cannot be lost by evil or bad character or conduct. It's part of your very nature as a person, that you are a person. It's why if there was somebody in a burning building who was completely unconscious and there was your favorite plant next to them, and you only carry your geranium out or this 4-year-old unconscious being, a child in a coma, that you don't know is ever going to come out of a coma. You would choose the child over your geranium, I hope. Because you believe the child has some kind of ontological dignity that the plant doesn't have, rooted in its being, even though it has no consciousness, no rational thought. This is a child in a coma. The second type is dignity of conscious, rational person. And this is where you're functioning, that we talked about, your reasoning, your consciousness, your sense of self, your desire to continue. Everybody wants to wake up tomorrow morning here, right? That's because you have this consciousness and rationalness. Pascal had the expression, he said, all our dignity consists in thought. And it's not that Pascal was denying ontological dignity. He just got a little carried away. He was having a bad hair day. But he said all our dignity consists in thought. And what he was doing, he was saying how important consciousness is. I mean, nobody denies that consciousness and reasoning and wanting to wake up in the morning is important. It's very important. This kind of dignity, what he meant was all of this type of dignity consists in thought. It's a wonderful thing to be able to think. It's a wonderful thing to be conscious. I mean, we should rejoice when we wake up in the morning. That's, usually we just wake up and we don't think about it. What an exciting thing to wake up in the morning. What an amazing thing to wake up in the morning. So that's that type of dignity. And then there's moral dignity. Also, rational, this can be lost. Obviously, if you're under anesthesia, you don't have that dignity. You probably have very little of it when you sleep unless you dream a lot. If you're in a coma, you don't. That dignity gets lost. And then there's moral, which comes from the right use of reason and will. It's rooted in moral goodness of the person, and it can be lost through evil acts. And note, morally depraved persons can be very clever, so they could have 1 and 2, but not have 3. And then last, we have bestowed dignity, our natural talents, somebody who's very artistic, very musical, with language, whatever. Natural relations, the dignity that you give to your parents and hopefully your grandparents. Hope my grandchildren watching here. And then something like high office, the dignity you show to a president or king, regardless of whether they have these other things or not. So I just wanted to point that out for those who had questions about what intrinsic dignity means. So I think it's important. So now I talk a little bit about what I call the Z word. I mentioned yesterday that this concept of separating human being and human person has only been seen in the abortion issue. There's no other moral issue where these two terms have been separated that I know of. There's a few times where end-of-life issues, it gets a little fuzzy, but it's never as clearly and distinct as it is in the abortion issue, where pro-choice clearly says it's a human being, it's biologically human, there's 46 chromosomes, but it's physical only. There's no soul there. There's no spirit is present. This thing is just growing and moving inside the woman, but there's no person there. There's no person there. And that's what the Supreme Court told us. There's no person there. And then there's the idea of the human person, spirit, soul, mind, being that is present in the human body at some point in time. Personhood comes in at some point in time. And I said that in the abortion issue, that's about the only place you hear of these two things separated. But that's not quite true, because you do hear about these things separated in science fiction. And one of the great places that it's separated is in C.S. Lewis's That Hideous Strength. Has anyone here read That Hideous Strength? There's a wonderful scene where two people are being followed by something, and it's dark. And I haven't read this for 30 years, so I don't quite remember the scene, but I remember the feeling of the scene, because they're trying to escape, and they're going over a mountain and through the woods, and this thing is following them. They can hear the footsteps at times, and it's biologically human. It has the shape and form of a human being. It has 46 chromosomes, but there's no person in it. There's no person. It's a thing that looks human, but it's not, because there's no spirit or soul. It's just kind of mechanically honed in on them, and it's gonna get them. And it's an absolutely hideous and creepy and scary scene. And you have to think about this thing, because these kind of creatures come out in a lot of recent sci-fi stuff. What do we call them?
Zombies.
That's right, they're zombies. The idea of a human body. And you can kind of picture going through the woods. And which would you rather have following you? A tiger or a zombie? See, we all know that the tiger is big and horrible and life-threatening, but it's not hideous. It's not hideous. It's not ghastly. There's something about the zombie that affects us with a totally different type of fear, because there's something hideous about it. A living, moving human body without a human person present is, well, we all know instinctively, it's not human. It's not human. A living, moving human body without a human person present is not human. It is something we all logically recognize as a ghastly something else. That's about the only way you can think of it. A ghastly something else. So what does this have to do with abortion? Well, for 40 years now, the pro-choice people and the Supreme Court has told us that the being in the womb is a living, moving, growing human body without a human person present. And I think it's time we looked at that and said, are you really trying to get everyone to believe that the thing that's growing inside a woman when she's pregnant for 9 months is a zombie? Because that's what we've been told. Because if you can tell me a living, moving human body without a human person is something else, I'd love to know what it is. I'd love to know what it is. And I wouldn't want it following me in the woods in the dark. So I think it's worth taking a look at, whether you're pro-life or pro-choice. I think this is worth taking a look at and thinking, what is this thing that you're claiming is a human being, but not a human person? It's worth taking a look at. I'd like to sort of, I've asked in the last 2 nights that we kind of hold off on questions until the end, but we have a lot of different topics to go through tonight. So I'm gladly take questions as we go along tonight. So, yes?
Yeah, I have a question. In the, maybe other people can answer it as well as you who are sitting here, but in the old idea of Aristotle, I think, the notion was that you have a human body, but it's not ensouled until later on, and there's a different kind of ensoulment for women or for men.
Right.
Females and males have different kinds of ensoulment. So wouldn't that be a little bit like this?
Right, and now we've come to realize just how horrible an idea that is. Because if you really look at it logically, it becomes a very creepy idea that somehow doesn't sit well with us. If you really look at it personally, it might be fine as like a theory, but if that, like I said, if that theory starts to follow you in the dark, you're going to start to realize that this is not such a cool theory. This is not such, and it doesn't seem to correspond to truth. It doesn't seem to correspond to truth. That you can have these two things separated and still have something that's connected to the human person, because we recognize that it's not a person, and it's hideously not a person. Yeah. So I think it's a theory that doesn't correspond to truth well.
Yeah, well, of course, though, dissenting pro-choice Catholics use that argument. They say, well, even Thomas Aquinas thought that they might, so they use that as a reason for justifying early abortion.
Well, Thomas doesn't open his biology. So I want to take a look at the Don Marquis, what's called the entire future golden rule argument. And basically he says, abortion is wrong because it deprives the being in the womb of its entire future. This is the greatest evil for anyone. It's wrong to kill a 90-year-old man. I mean, we would all agree to that. But it's worse to kill a 9-year-old kid. I mean, we all see the logic of that. It's worse to kill a 9-year-old kid because the 9-year-old kid's got his whole thing. I mean, that's why on the lifeboats, you know, the kids get on first. They've got their whole life ahead of them. So it's worse because it's a greater deprivation. That's what Don Marquis wants us to take a look at. And he says, along with Nat Hentoff, even if the being in the womb is only a potential person, it still has an entire future as a person. And you just can't take that away from him. So he says to deprive anyone, born or preborn, of his or her future as a person is a terrible evil. If I kill you, that's what I'm depriving you of. That's what I'm depriving you of. And he wants to say that the preborn child hasn't had any chance at life outside. Any chance. So that you're depriving this person of even more life than the born person. So it's even worse because it's more deprivation. It's more deprivation. And then he says, just take a look at the golden rule. The golden rule alone, which is kind of included in what we discussed as Gert's rules, the golden rule alone tells you, well, you know, if you want your entire future taken away from you, well, then simply don't take someone else's away. And again, this works whether it's a potential person in the womb or a full person. It's going to have a future. If you just leave it alone, whatever it is, it's going to have a future. And you just can't take people's futures away from them. You just can't take people's futures away from them. And so he would say, that's what's wrong. In the core of abortion, that's what's wrong. That's what you're taking away. You know, it's fine to say that, you know, you put it into biological terms or you're causing pain, but he says that's the least of it. The causing pain, he wants to say, is the least of it. It's this time, the time that we have to live. All the experiences that a human being is going to have. You know, yeah, there's suffering, but there's good times, there's bad times, there's ups and downs. You know, we all have a roller coaster ride of a life. You want to take that away from somebody? That is a horrible thing to take away from somebody. It's what we have. And Nat Hentoff, who is an atheist, is going to say that's all we have. That's all we have. So again, there's no need for religion in this argument because this is all you have, says Nat Hentoff. This is your life. This is your life. That's why it's so horrible when you hear that somebody is murdered. Their life is taken away from them. All the rest of the experiences that they were meant to have are taken away. Now you have this being at the very beginning of the journey. You know, the very beginning, they've just gotten into the roller coaster cart. They haven't even had any of the ride yet. You're going to take the whole thing away? You're going to take the whole thing away? Like, who are you to do that? Like, what a decision to make for another person. What a decision to make for another person. Yes, it may be a horrible burden for a woman to carry a pregnancy for 9 months. But you're going to take away a person's entire future because of that time. And they say, no, you can't do that. Years and years of a lifetime is going to get taken away. You can't do that. You can't do that. Don Marquis, the entire future argument. So let's look at killing eggs and sperm because that often comes up. I just realized I don't have my clock here, so somebody's going to have to let me know when we're at about halftime. A lot of times, the question of eggs and sperm come up. And the idea is, you know, well, eggs and sperm are killed all the time. Eggs and sperm are killed all the time. And this newly formed ovum turning into a zygote is just a combination of egg and sperm. So what's the problem? What about all the destruction of eggs and sperm? Lots of them die all the time, and no one's upset about their future. I mean, when was the last time you worried about the future of an egg or the future of a sperm? I mean, nobody talks about that at all. And yet they come together, and now you're concerned about this being's future. Like, what is the problem here? Well, we want to say abortion is not the same as destroying egg or sperm, because an egg or sperm could become many persons. Any particular egg or any particular sperm could become many persons. But once one and one of them come together, there's no longer a possibility of many persons. There's one. There's just one at the beginning. And so that's a very, very different thing. And it's important to know that. Because it's often this idea is all, believe it or not, rolled into one idea. Okay, and this is the pro-life reply. So here you have the pro-choice question, what about this destruction? And the pro-life reply is, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but these are zillions of potential persons. But once one and one come together, then you have one single person, and you're at the beginning, and it's no longer potential. It's no longer a potential situation. So you're talking, Don Marquis says, you're depriving somebody of their entire future. Well, that's nice because, your life has been basically happy. You're probably, again, educated person discussing the matter. You all look like you've been fed. You all look pretty wanted here. So when you talk about futures, you're talking really, let's be honest, pro-choices, let's be honest, you're talking about a happy future. You're talking about a happy future. You're not talking a miserable future. You're not talking about a bad future. Some futures aren't so great. Some futures are sad and painful and filled with suffering. Get real. Some futures aren't good. And who are you to sort of shove that on somebody? You are doing the being in the womb a favor by aborting it in bad situations. You are doing the being in the womb a favor by aborting it in bad situations. It's unwanted, maybe it's not going to be fed, it's maybe being born into poverty, maybe an abusive situation. Why would you push a child into that kind of future? Do it a favor and abort it. It's a favor. It is a favor to abort a child in a bad situation where the future's not looking too good. If the future looks all right, but in a bad situation, do the kid a favor. Don't let a child be born into a horrible situation. Well, pro-life wants to say that most unhappy people still choose to live even when they're unhappy. Suicide is still a rare choice. When you think of the number of people that suffer in the world, yes, many people choose suicide, and it's a terrible thing to choose. But most people don't. Most people, even in terrible situations, in sad situations, choose to hang in there. But the bottom line would say, if you're really pro-choice, shouldn't the choice be up to the person himself or herself and not our choice for them? Not our choice for them. If you're really pro-choice, can you make the choice of abortion for another person? Can you make that choice for another person? How pro-choice are you? That's what pro-life wants to ask. Doesn't pro-choice come down to making your own choices? Making your own choices. So yes, some futures are not happy. Absolutely. But let's leave it up to that person to choose. So, if in doubt, the Supreme Court, let me just read this because this is what they said in 1973. We need not resolve the difficult question of when life begins, when those trained in the respective disciplines of medicine, philosophy, and theology are unable to arrive at any consensus, the judiciary at this point, in the development of man's knowledge is not in a position to speculate as to the answer. So the bottom line is the Supreme Court said we have no idea what the being in the womb is. The theologians don't seem to know what the being in the womb is. The doctors don't seem to know. They can't decide. The philosophers, forget it. They have no idea. They're back and forth. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a not. So we are all, they said, we are all in doubt as to what this being is. We have no idea. We have no idea at this point in time, 40 years ago, what this thing in the womb is. We are in doubt. That's the state that we're in. And they acknowledge that perfectly and clearly. So we're in doubt. So pro-life says, if you're in doubt, pro-life wants us to give the benefit of doubt to life. And one of the best analogies that pro-life has says, you know, let's say you're hunting in the woods. You're deer hunting. And now you got a gun. You know, you're deer hunting and you've got a gun. And now there's other hunters in the area. You know, you're not the only hunter out there. There's other hunters in the area. And now there's something over there rustling in the bushes. And you think it's a deer. But it might not be a deer. There's other hunters. It could be another hunter. It could be a person. So maybe it's a deer and maybe it's a hunter. Any person who hunts will say you can't shoot until you know it's a deer. If there's any possibility, if there's even a 1% possibility that it's a person, you can't shoot. We had a horrible situation in Rhode Island about 10 years ago where his father and son went hunting. And the 10-year-old boy decided, and they both had their orange gear on, and the 10-year-old boy decided he needed to run back to the car to get something. And he ran back, and he was hot, and he didn't like his orange thing on, so he took his orange thing off, and he took his orange hat off. And then when he came back, he decided to come back to Dad by another route. And he came rustling through the trees without his orange stuff on. And Dad was so excited because there was a deer coming. They were deer hunting. And he couldn't see the deer, but he knew he and his son were the only ones out there, and his son had gone to the car, and he knew his son was wearing an orange hat. So whatever was rustling in the trees, he couldn't see what it was, but he was sure it was a deer. And he shot. And he shot. And it was his son. It's like you don't shoot until you know it's a deer, till you see the deer. So if there's any doubt, we all know you don't shoot. There's any possibility of life. And pro-life says, all right, maybe we're not positive. You want to say we're not positive this thing in the womb, this being in the womb is a person, but we certainly know to begin with that it turns into a person. That it turns into a person. We know with 100% certainty that it turns into a person. But even if we're in doubt, you don't shoot at things that might be a person or might not be. Like nobody does that if it might be a person. If there's a 1% chance that it's a person and not a deer, you simply don't shoot at it. That's just logic. That's just logic. Or the idea of someone who's lost at sea, someone falls overboard, and you're not sure if they're alive. How long do you search for them? Well, you search as long as you possibly and reasonably can. It's not a simple thing to just say, oh, he's probably dead. It's like you search and you search and you search until there's no possibility that that person could survive. Because human life is important. Human life is important. So we keep searching. Or let's say we need an organ transplant. We need one really badly for somebody. We'll just take Father Moses. Just take his heart, his kidneys. It's like, he seems to be relaxed over there. He might be asleep. Maybe we won't notice. It's like, what? Like, what? No, he's a person there. There's a person there. You can't just. So now we have someone who's dying. You're pretty sure they're dead. You're pretty sure they're dead. Well, can you take their organs? You're pretty sure you can't take them if they're resting. You can't take. Now they're dying, but we're not sure if they're dead. Well, we listen for a heartbeat. Can you take their organs if there's a heartbeat? Because we think there's a person there. If there's a heartbeat, we think there's a person there. Well, there's a heartbeat with the being in the womb. How come we think there's not a person there? It's a strange thing, this heartbeat thing. Heartbeat is a sign at the end of life. Heartbeat is an idea at the end of life that there's life there, that the person is still there. But at the beginning, it's not. And yet we wouldn't take organs out of somebody because we're in doubt. If there's any doubt that the person is not dead, we have to wait. If there's any doubt, because that's what we do when we're in doubt. Until we know for sure that the being in the womb is not a person, we can't kill it. That's what pro-life wants to say, until we're sure. So if you're in doubt, until you know for sure that it's not a person, because anytime there's a possibility that a person is there, you can't start shooting. For any reason, you can't start shooting. Not to mention the risk of pain. Pain brings in a whole nother dimension to the whole thing. When you know that you might be causing pain. You might be causing pain. There might be enough consciousness there for there to be pain. That pro-life says we have to look at that. We have to look at that. If there's any doubt that there's human life there, we have to err on the side of life. And we do this over and over again for born people. We err on the side of life. Who doesn't err on the side of life? Human life. Human life. So pro-choice says, you're in doubt. You're in doubt about this thing in the womb. You're in doubt. It's at the beginning the size of a dot at the end of a sentence. And you're in doubt. Well, if you're in doubt about that thing in the womb, why don't you just turn your gaze and look at the woman? Because there's no doubt that she's a person. There's no doubt that she's a person. So if in doubt, look at what you're not in doubt about. Because you're not in doubt about her life and what's important to her. So why are you looking, when you make this decision that abortion is wrong, why are you looking at what you're in doubt about? The Supreme Court was absolutely right when they said, if you're in doubt about this thing in the womb, well, just look at the woman. She's a full person. There's no question of her personhood. Women and the other children and the importance of society, these are real. We don't have any doubt that they're real. These are important, for there's no doubt they're persons. You absolutely have to choose what you're not in doubt about over what you are in doubt about. You absolutely have to choose what you're in doubt about, what you're not in doubt about, over what you are in doubt about. Why would you get caught up in this whole muddle over this little tiny thing that doesn't even look like a person, when you have a full-grown human being right in front of you who has needs and desires and hopes and dreams and consciousness and rational thought and wants to exist tomorrow? Like, why would you choose in any situation where she wants to abort, why would you choose this doubtful thing over what's right in front of you? what's right in front of you. She's real, her needs are real, her right to self-determination is real, and her right to choose is real. And you're concerned about this doubtful thing in the womb. What are you thinking? How much more real does personhood have to be than the person who's right in front of you, who is saying she wants an abortion, for whatever her reasons are? If you're in doubt, the Supreme Court was absolutely correct to go what was right in front of them, which was the woman. You choose the woman and what she wants over this doubtful being in the womb. That's what you choose. That's what you choose. So there's two different ways to look at if in doubt. I'm going to stop there for a minute and see if you have any specific questions. Yes.
So what do you think about using medical information in your arguments? Like, for example, and they measure brainwaves in babies. They now believe that babies actually dream at certain stages. And there's lots of medical evidence that would refute the idea that they're not a person because they are aware.
Right. Certainly the technology has changed since Roe v. Wade. The technology has changed. And it is changing the face of abortion, absolutely, because we do Sunni Anand's research, pain after 20 weeks has clearly changed things. I think this is referring much more to your earlier abortions, where you don't have any kind of consciousness yet. Certainly maybe in the first 4 to 6 weeks, where there's very little brain activity. They still say there is a small possibility of pain. But again, remember that at the Life and Choice conference that I went to, most pro-choice people morally didn't want anything to do with abortion once, there's dreaming and stuff like that, when it's becoming less and less doubtful. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between early and late abortions.
Before we take a break, I'm thinking of the online people. So before we take the break, all those people who are watching this or listening to it online, if you wanted to get this wonderful book, Understanding Abortion, From Mixed Feelings to Rational Thought, you could just Google that title, and Stephen Schwartz, Schwarz, with no T in Schwartz. But I think if they just Google Understanding Abortion, From Mixed Feelings to Rational Thought, you could get hold of the book. So,
well, let's take a short break, stretch for a minute. It's a lot of information, and we'll come back in about 3-4 minutes. Thank you.
Which way of going wrong is good? I gotta make decisions. I think use fractals to explain it. Use fractals.
Sister Kyle, your math class, asked me how tall the chapel is. I have no idea. it would be easy to figure out the dimensions of the floor. There was one tile around the tile. But I said, I don't know how they're going to figure out the, I'll figure out, I said, what is the top?
Trying to describe being the total smooth, fraction or everybody has a special homework next week. The nerves are wrong. So yeah, it's actually more painful. That is really raw nerve. Nature. Science is yeah, it's safe to see she just take it on. Well, there's a take the cigarette. Horrible delivery.
It's not my camera.
Although I've gotten to the point where now I think you want to do this type of color and not enough of the others. And I got a lot of string missing at 4 or 5 rolls of these different colors.
I guess we're almost ready to get started here.
Could I just ask,
Yes.
a friend of mine in the diocese of Boston, who says that's where the slaves died, the slaves, Augustine, if I have the name of the order right, his Father Tom Carlton.
Yes.
Father Tom is a longtime pro-life priest. He has a website called fetal-pain.com, and he's collected the evidence that the baby feels pain in the womb for many, many years in this website. And this website could be a valuable resource for anybody who might want to investigate something.
Absolutely. Yes. And again, Dr. Sumi Anand, he probably has a lot of his research. Yeah, he's done research for about 20 years. Yeah. So what is the website is called?
Fetal-pain.com.
Fetal-pain.com.
Right, I'm pretty sure it could be fetalpain.com. But I know that I've called it on the website many times, and Father does a beautiful job of, collecting the evidence that's just, we see people turning in. I wanted to ask you the name of the person we just mentioned.
Sumi Anand, Dr. Sumi Anand, S-U, it looks like Sunny, S-U-N-N-Y, and then capital A-N-A-N-D, Anand. I believe he's either from, I'm trying to remember if he's from India or Pakistan, delightful man that I met at the Life and Choice Conference, and he claims to be neither pro-life nor pro-choice. He stays completely out of the political arena whatsoever. Never, it simply just states the medical facts that he's found.
Good. His voice is important, and humanizing the baby in the womb.
Yes.
It's quite hard to do.
So we've looked at the two, compared to how pro-life sees if in doubt, give the benefit of doubt to life in the womb, the idea that there's a person there, don't shoot unless you know it's a deer, it could be a person. If there's any chance it's a person, don't do it. And then we've looked at the pro-choice side, we're not in doubt about the woman, pay attention to what you're not in doubt about. And so we want to now do what we call Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager was the idea that whenever you're in doubt, when there's two different possibilities that you're in doubt about, it's always a good idea to sort of look at which one is worse, come out worse. And I agree, we use this all the time. And a good example of when I used to use this all the time is I used to go visit a girlfriend once a week, my good friend Deb. And we would hang out on Tuesday nights together. She lived about a half an hour from me. And so I'd go and visit her. And during the winter, when I'd be driving home from her house, and this was our girls' night, so it was just about 1 o'clock in the morning, I'd be driving home. And it would be cold. And I would pass a gas station just before I would get on Route 95 to head to my house. And inadvertently, every single time at 1 o'clock in the morning, and it's freezing cold, New England winter, I'm driving down, I would see the gas station and I would glance at my gas gauge, and sure enough, every single time, right on the empty line, like right there, just like maybe a hair above empty. And so now the question is, do I have enough gas to get home? Well, I don't know. I think I do. Well, I'm not sure. I'm in doubt. Do I have enough gas to get home? And at 1 o'clock in the morning, when it's, like 0 degrees and miserable, and I don't want to get out of my car that's just barely warmed up, I have to look at the possibilities here. Maybe I have enough gas to get home, and maybe I don't. Those are the two possibilities. And if I don't, it means I'm going to be stuck at 1 o'clock in the morning on the side of Route 95, all by my little lonesome, and have to call somebody to come and rescue me. But, so that's terrible. That's really bad. But then there's the other thing, maybe I have enough gas to get home, and I'm getting out at the gas station in the cold and pumping gas, and that's miserable too. So there's these two possible miserable outcomes. There's the miserable outcome of getting out of my car and pumping some gas, which I don't like that miserable possibility. Or there's the miserable outcome of, I don't right that absolutely belongs to somebody. You're taking away a right that absolutely belongs to somebody. And if we're in doubt, you need to do Pascal's wager. Which way of going wrong is worse if you're in doubt? Which right is the worst to take away from somebody? The right to choose abortion and to self-direction and not carrying a pregnancy, or the right to life and the right to your whole future? So that's the question. That's the question. And it's very helpful because it helps you to take a look at which of these things are more important if you're in doubt. If you're in doubt, it's a way to logically think about, if we're in doubt, how are we going to go wrong? Because we don't want to go wrong. But if we're not sure, then this is a way to weigh the issue and to take a look at, just in case we're in doubt and we're not sure, which is the way you don't want to go wrong. This is called a conceived question. Did my parents conceive me? Or did they conceive a biological organism that later became me? So this is the question, when does a human person begin to exist? Did your parents conceive you? Did they conceive you? Or did they conceive something that later became you? It's an important question. It's an important question. What did they conceive? We talk about conception. We talk about fertilization. When did you begin? Did they conceive you? Well, both sides agree that from the moment of conception, and again, both sides agree, pro-life and pro-choice both agree, that from the moment of conception, there is a complex, dynamic, and rapidly growing individual human being. Again, we have that human being here, biological. It starts out as a single cell called a zygote. By a natural and continuous process, it will develop into a newborn baby with trillions of cells in about 9 months. Both sides agree that the being in the womb is biologically human. But is it a person? Is there a soul there? Is there a spirit? Is there a me there? Is there a me here? Did my parents conceive me? Or something that later turned into me, became me? Is there anybody home there when conception occurs? Pro-life says my parents absolutely conceived me. And pro-choice says my parents conceived a biological organism that later became me, at least the ones that say that it's not a person. But keep in mind, they both agree that it's the same single biological reality. Pro-choice says it's a biological entity that turns into a person. Pro-life says, no, it's me all the way through. I was once a zygote, a tiny being, and then bigger, and then all phases of me. A person looks different at different stages of life, but it was the same me all the way back. So I can show you pictures of me when I was 20, and when I was 10, and when I was 4, and when I was first born. And if it had sonograms back then, you could have seen a picture of me all the way back. That was me. There was never a time when it turned into me. I was me all along. And we have Horton Hears a Who, which we're all familiar with. A person's a person, no matter how small. Is that true? That's the question. Is that true? Is a person, no matter how small? Pro-life says yes. So when does a person begin? When does a person begin? Well, there's all kinds of lines that are drawn, and I just want to talk about some of the lines that are drawn. Pro-choice late lines say at birth or later. So the Supreme Court said at birth. That's when a person begins. Peter Singer and a few other people like him say after. Michael Tooley, after. Peter's first 1 month after birth, 3 months after birth. Again, that the consciousness, the self-awareness, and that desire to want to continue in existence. How can you possibly be a person if you don't want to continue in existence? So Tooley, 1 week to 3 months, you want sufficient brain function. And again, there's that word function. Get hold of that word function. Sufficient brain function to count as a person. This is the achievement view. You achieve personhood. Achieve it at birth. You know, has anyone ever seen a newborn baby? They're not that rational. They're not that rational. They sleep a lot. They're not conscious a lot. When they sleep, they really sleep. So a good part of the time, they're not even conscious, the way even you and I are when we sleep, where there's a lot going on. And communication skills are really low, other than a lot of screaming. Communication skills at birth are like really low. Like I hope right now your communication skills are like really up from that time, okay? Because you're more of a person now. See, you're more of a person, okay? So where to draw the line on when a person begins, birth or later? Is a teenager a person? Oh, it's questionable. It's questionable. We need sufficient brain function. We need sufficient brain function. So achievement view, where to draw the line, birth or later. And then there's the pro-choice early and middle lines, and this is viability. And viability has been discussed a lot. It was even discussed in Roe v. Wade, where they said, maybe in the second and third trimester, the state might have some interest, because this could be some kind of a potential person thing going on here. And their big concern was viability, the ability to survive outside the womb. And also around viability, there's pain. So you've got pain, viability. So it seems like once you have viability, the ability to survive outside the womb, a lot of people want to say, that's right around 20 weeks now, we're pushing it back. Technology is pushing it back to 19 weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if pretty sure we see 17 and 18 weeks in utero. So viability is a matter of technology to a large extent. A child that's viable here in the United States, if they're born in Timbuktu, may not be viable, simply because we have greater technology here. So it's interesting, viability is hugely a part of technology. But in general, a lot of people like the idea of viability. It's like, okay, the child is no longer dependent on the woman. It can be sort of its own person. And so that's an understandable line. It can be its own person now. It can breathe on its own, or maybe with a little help from an incubator, but it can make it outside the womb. So that's a great place to draw the line. It's a great place to draw a line. It says pro-choice early and middle lines. Great place, viability. And then pro-life, the early line is conception. And this is what's considered the radical break view. And I'll explain why in a few minutes. But this is the idea that my parents conceived me. This is your sled argument, where it's smaller, less developed, in a different environment, greater degree of dependency. But it goes all the way back. It's your continuum argument. Life, the person begins at conception. The person begins at conception. That idea of following your way all the way back, that there's no break all the way along the line. Viability is not a break. It's a matter of technology. That's what pro-life is going to say with conception. Viability is just a matter of technology. Just a matter of technology. That's where to draw the line, the different ones. So the one I'm going to talk about, because it's the one that's the most controversial, is conception. I mean, most people can sort of get the idea, okay, if the kid can survive outside, we'll give it a break and we'll let it outside, and that makes sense to a lot of people. Okay, that makes sense. Or it begins to function, or it begins to feel pain. Okay, that's got to do with the person. But conception, that's probably some religious idea. There can't be a reason for conception. But I want to suggest that there are 3 reasons, actually, for conception. So I'm going to have the pro-life hat on for you now. You're going to love it. There's 3 reasons for conception. Nothing to do with religion, because as we know, abortion is not a religious issue. 3 reasons. It's the only radical break. When you look at that entire continuum of human life, from conception, day by day by day, of a growing entity, finally reaches some kind of viability, all dependent on technology, and then birth. Very few people think birth really changes anything except for the Supreme Court. And you continue all the way through life. There's no radical break. But something radical does happen at conception. For the first thing, you have 2 entities. You have a sperm, which nobody suggests is a person, and you have an ovum, which nobody suggests is a person. And most of these things get washed away and never become persons. You have 2 totally separate entities that become one. One. Never to be pulled apart again. Never to turn back into sperm and egg again. 2 totally separate entities, a sperm and an egg, come together to form something that is neither a sperm nor an egg, but that develops into this thing that looks like a baby in 9 months. This is a radical break. Two things totally unlike what they come together and become. That's a radical break. That's a radical break. That's nothing gradual.
This is an argument that I don't know has ever been proven, but something animates this one being. And one day I looked up the word animates, and it comes from the Latin anima. And I translated the Latin anima, it became the word soul.
Well, something happens here, and whatever happens here, it's a radical break. Because anytime two things become one, and the one thing is totally unlike the two things, you have a radical break. The other interesting thing, the second thing here, is that these two things that come together are at the very end of their life. A sperm lasts about 3 to 5 days if he's lucky. Okay? He gets 5 days. That's it. And then he's dead. He's dead. 5 days, dead. End of story. An ovum, the egg, lives 24 hours. It's amazing anybody ever gets pregnant. The egg lives 24 hours, and then it's dead. That's it. 24-hour lifespan, a 5-day lifespan. End of story. End of story. But these two things come together, and all of a sudden, you have a being that is at the beginning of its lifespan and can live 100 years. That's crazy. That's a radical break. This thing's gonna die in 5 days. This thing's gonna die in 24 hours. They come together and they create a being that's at the beginning of its life and can live 100 years. That's amazing. That's a radical break. There's something different that started here. That's a radical break. Third thing, the sperm and ovum. Sperm has the genetic code of the father, of the man. The ovum has the genetic code of the woman. Identical to the mother and the father. The sperm and egg come together. You have it entirely, the whole thing does a dance. The whole genetic thing does a dance. Chromosomes swish swash around, boom, stops. It's a process, and then boom, a brand new, totally unique in the history of the entire world, brand new genetic code, unlike any other genetic code ever. That's a radical break. That's a radical break. So you have 3 reasons why conception is absolutely a radical break. 2 entities become one. 2 things at the end of their life, starting a brand new, entirely new cycle of 100 years. You're talking something that lives 24 hours and something that lives a couple of days coming together for 100 years. That's amazing. That's a radical break. And a totally new genetic code. Totally new genetic code. All other lines, if you look at viability, if you look at, when pain comes in, they're all a matter of what we've called SLED. Size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. Nothing else matches conception for these 3 reasons. For these 3 reasons. And both pro-life and pro-choice have to look at this, have to think about it, because it's part of the issue. It has to be answered. This is a radical break. Any questions? Yes.
Well, obviously you could just call this in Thomistic metaphysics. You would just say Aristotelian metaphysics. The human person is, we were talking about the essence versus the accidents, right?
What do you mean exactly?
Well, the human nature is.
Right, the being of it there, the essence is there, right, immediately.
Right.
But you also have, you actually have the accidents going on also. But the essence is immediately there. Yes.
That's not as essential as the basic human being.
Right. The being is there. The being is there. And this is all, obviously long before any kind of functioning comes in. You have something radically different going on. Yes.
It says seen being before and after, as far as developed. Before what?
Oh, before and after birth.
Oh, so
Yeah, before birth. Same being before birth and after. It's only smaller and less developed. Yeah. Not conception. Sorry, I have to fix that. Can't believe how quickly this got whipped together. But I will remember that. Yes.
Recently we had talked about evolution. They're saying in the early stages, like the zygote goes through the animal stage, or where, and it's like all animals go through the stage, and that's what they're saying. Like the human being goes through that same stage, saying that we're kind of evolved. But I was wondering, does pro-choice ever give that argument?
Well, there's often the argument is that it doesn't look human. If you looked at, a zygote, and if you just, the untrained eye looks at it, well, you can't tell the difference between a human baby pig, a human baby and a baby pig, because at this point in time, to our untrained eye, they look the same. Well, that's nice, but they aren't the same. They don't have the same DNA. They don't have the same genetic code. So I think that they're kind of getting at is to the untrained eye, yes, we go through similar things to create a body, absolutely. But the being of the pig is never going to turn into a person, okay? It's never going to function as a person because it's not a person. And if you got in there with a microscope, you would know that this is a baby pig and it's not a baby human. So I think that's what they're getting at, is there's this idea of it doesn't look human. Well, the reality is it does look human. That's what a human looks like. That's what a human looks like. So, maybe we could take a picture of your eardrum and the eardrum of a dog, and we might be able to tell the difference. But the bottom line is one is a human eardrum and one is a dog's eardrum. It's just a matter of whether we're trained to know the difference or not. That problem is with us, not with the being itself.
When would they classify as a pig as like a pig?
Oh, at the very beginning. An eagle you can't touch an eagle egg from the very beginning. An eagle is protected from the moment of conception. Okay, an eagle is connected. If you break an eagle egg, you break an eagle egg the day that the mama eagle lays the eagle egg, you're going to go to jail because we know it's an eagle. Okay, we know it's an eagle. Yeah. So we know from the very beginning what things are. Sometimes we can't, an untrained person can't tell, but somebody who's trained knows the difference. Yeah, from the very beginning, things are genetically either one creature or another creature or a different creature. Nothing like a dog never turns into a cat. A cat never turns into a tomato. An eagle never turns into a pig. Things are what they are from the moment of conception. And there's never, with eagles, there seems to be no question of that. But with humans, there seems to be some question. So here we have conception, this 24-hour window of opportunity. And like I say, it's a wonder anybody ever gets here. When you think that your existence, your being here, was a 24-hour period of opportunity. But here we are. There's millions of sperm, there's only one egg, and the fascinating thing is they seem to know what direction to go in, so it's an amazing process. There's often this term, fertilized egg. The conceptus is not anything to do with an egg anymore. It's not a fertilized egg. Horrible term, implying that the egg is still there and it's sort of changed. It's a totally different thing. It's not an egg anymore at all. It's a conceptus, just a term to get away from. So pro-choice, I want to reply to the idea of conception by starting out by saying, I'm just going to switch hats here. The conceptus is tiny. I mean, we're talking like the smallest speck on the floor here that you can barely see with the naked eye. You want to tell me that's a person? What are you, nuts? It's a speck. It's a speck. It is tiny. And it is undeveloped. It is nothing like what we consider a person. Nothing. It doesn't have one trait in common with a person. Not one. There's nothing there. At best, I mean, it's like saying an acorn is an oak tree. Like nobody says an acorn is an oak tree. Maybe it's a blueprint for an oak tree, but it's not an oak tree. It's not an oak tree. It's nothing. It's a blueprint for a person. Nothing like a house. Nothing at all. It's just a blueprint for a person. And the zygote could split and become identical twins, which would be two persons. So if the conceptus is a person, but it can split and become two persons, how could it still be one person? So it says you have a problem there. The zygote could still split and become identical twins and be two persons, so it cannot be a person. And again, it's here, rather a person comes into being gradually, when later on it is more developed and larger. So that's your pro-choice argument. You've got to weigh it against the radical break arguments and look at the two. Figure out, does something happen with this tiny, tiny thing? Is a person no matter how small? Is a person no matter how small? That size doesn't determine personhood? Or does it? Or does it? Does functioning determine personhood? Or does functioning presuppose being? That's what you have to weigh and look at, because those are the two arguments that you need to think about. And pro-life 2, a zygote could split would say that the zygote that splits is two persons sharing one space, and it splits. Just like the idea of conjoined twins. You have two persons sharing one whole body, and hopefully with medical technology, we can take them apart. And he says that just happens naturally. So that's an important argument that needs to be noticed, and you need to be aware of, and you need to think about it. Which is it? Which is it? Does size matter? Because it seems with the idea of conception, size and functioning are the two biggest things. How could something that small be a person? How could something that small be a person? And how could something that doesn't function as a person be a person? And the opposite, if it begins to function, it had to first have the being. And size, well, we don't start out very big even when we're born. And we change in size. And then when we get quite elderly, we're going to shrink quite a bit again. So that's the questions. Those are the two arguments that you need to weigh. Is everyone getting tired? I'm thinking we'll go through. This is a tough one. We'll go through this last argument here. A woman's right to her body. And pro-choice says a woman absolutely has a right to her body. It's hers. It's sacred ground. You have no right to mess with her body. I mean, think about your own body right now. If I came over and touched you and you didn't want to be touched, or I just came up to your body with a pair of shears and started clipping what hair you have left. Just started clipping away at you. You'd say, get away from me. Get away from me. This is my hair. You can't just touch me. You can't just poke at me. Here we're talking about pregnancy. Not your hair on your head that you don't want touched. We're talking about something far more intimate than the hair on your head. We're talking about pregnancy. And you want to tell her what to do or not do with something that's inside her body, that's sacred space. That's sacred. It belongs to her. My body belongs to me. If as I'm walking out of here tonight, you grab at me, appropriately or inappropriately, I'm going to tell you to get your hands off of my body. It's mine. You don't have any right to touch me unless I want to be touched. You have no right to do anything to my body unless I want it. Why? Because it's mine. It's mine. A woman's body belongs to her. She and only she can make the intimate, most intimate, you can't even stress enough, decision regarding pregnancy and abortion. You want the government to be in there. You want men in there. You want the general public to suggest what a woman can do with her body when you don't even want me to come up to you and clip a hair off your head. But the body is sacred territory. Sacred territory. Take a look at it. Think about it, because it's important when you don't want a hair clipped to be telling somebody else in the intimacy of pregnancy and sexuality and life decisions what a woman should do when she finds herself with an unwanted pregnancy. Who do you think you are? It's very interesting, a woman's right to her body. Because the only time pro-choice almost ever talks about a woman's right to her body is when she's pregnant. I've never heard anybody talk about a woman's right to her body outside of pregnancy. And I think we need to look at that. Why do we never hear about a woman's right to her body in general? Furthermore, when was the last time you heard anybody talk about a man's right to his body? Why not? Why not? It seems that the pro-choice view of a woman's right to her body is a very, very narrow window that kind of is caught in this place of pregnancy. Nobody talks about a woman's right to her body outside of pregnancy, and nobody talks about a man's right to his body. Why is that? I think both pro-life and pro-choice need to ask that question. Why is that? Why is there no discussion of a man's right to his body? And why is a woman's right to her body only in connection with pregnancy? Pro-life says, you know what? Pro-choice side is absolutely right. A woman absolutely has a right to her body. And don't ever suggest that she doesn't. Because when you don't want me, and so does a man, when you don't want me coming up and clipping the hairs off your head, you absolutely are correct. Because it's yours. It's part of your body. And your body is sacred. Sacred territory. And you can't just come touching my body because it's mine. It's mine. But here's the problem. When do you get that right to your body? When did I get this right to my body? You ever bought a refrigerator or a car or something? Usually comes with a guarantee. You know how when you buy something, you get the guarantee? When? When you buy a car, when do you get the guarantee? When you get the car, right? So if you buy a car and it comes with a guarantee, you get the guarantee when you get the car. When you get older and you buy a refrigerator, it comes with a guarantee with it. You get it when you get the refrigerator. So now you have this body. You have this body, and it's yours, and you have the right to it, and no one else can mess with it. But when do you get that right? Well, pro-life wants to say, you know what, you get the right when you get your body. You don't get the right when you get pregnant. You get the right long before you're ever pregnant. You get the right when you get your body. In fact, men who never get pregnant also get the same right to their body, which is why I can't start clipping at your hair or poking at you. Because you have a right to your body, and you got that right, pro-life wants to say, when you got your body. See, it's not this narrow thing. Pro-life wants to say the right to your body is huge and expansive and begins not when you're pregnant and not just for women, but for everybody, and you get it when you get your body. It's as simple as that. You get it when you get your body. Both men and women have a right to their body, and that right begins when they get their body. And even if your body happens to be inside somebody else's body, it has autonomy. It has rights not to be messed with, hurt, or killed. When did you get your body? When did you get your body? You got your body at conception. I mean, you didn't get your body at birth. I mean, nobody thinks they got their body at birth. And you didn't get your body the day before birth, because you obviously had it then. And you didn't get your body if you go back at viability, because you already had the body that was developing there. And you didn't get your body when maybe at 19 weeks when pain started, because in order to feel pain, you have to have a body. Well, you didn't get your body when your heart started to beat, because you already had to have a body for your heart to start to beat. So you didn't get your body at 19 days. You had to have gotten your body before 19 days. So you can just work your way back. Well, you had your body when you had your when you got your genetic code, for sure. Well, you got your genetic code at conception. You want to talk about a right to the body? Pro-life says, okay, we'll talk about the right to the body. Absolutely. Absolutely a woman has a right to her body. Only problem is that she gets that right when she gets her body. If your body is even inside somebody else's body, it still has autonomy. It still has autonomy. You have a right not to be messed with, not to be hurt, and certainly not to be killed. So it's an expanded view of the right to the body. You know, a lot of times when you look at pro-life and pro-choice, it looks like pro-choice has these huge, expansive, liberal views, right? We think of it as being a liberal view. And, you know, you're trying to stifle a great right that women have. And pro-life wants to say, oh, no, you don't have right, that kind of right. And pro-life wants to squish it all down. But when it comes to the right to the body, it's surprisingly just the opposite. It's just the opposite. It's pro-life that says, yeah, a woman has a right to her body. And not just when she becomes pregnant. She has this huge right to her body from the very moment that she gets that body. It's a much more expansive view, even though it's usually seen as just the opposite. Any questions at this point? Got 2 more slides, and I'm going to let you go home and go to bed. See, the people at home online are already in bed watching this, right? All snugged in with their coffee. You know? Any questions? Okay. Just briefly want to talk about early versus late abortions. This is Andrew Peach at the Providence College in Rhode Island. And what he wants to say is that late abortions are morally worse or more difficult to justify than late abortions. And he's a pro-life person. I want to make that clear so I don't get into trouble with Andrew. But he still wants to say late abortions are morally worse or more difficult to justify. And he gives 3 reasons for this. And this is a view, this is a really nice place to kind of end tonight, because so often we think of, you know, pro-life is over here and pro-choice is over there, and sort of never the twain shall meet. But the reality is that they do meet. Halfway through pregnancy, at 20 weeks or around 19 weeks, halfway through pregnancy, most people, at least on the moral level, we'll talk about the legal later, but on the moral level, pro-life and pro-choice are in absolute agreement that abortions after 20 weeks are not a good, and they're worse, and we want to avoid them. Nobody in either camp wants abortions, for the most part, 99% of the time, after 20 weeks. So it's important to know that. Why? Late abortions cause pain to the being in the womb, whether it's a person, or an animal or whatever it is. There's clearly some sentient being there that's feeling pain, and we don't like that. Early abortions do not, or there's less chance of it. So that seems to be recognized by the general public. The general public even generally thinks abortions only take place in the first trimester. But almost everybody, except for maybe Peter Singer, a few Francis Kisslings, almost everybody does not like the idea at all of abortion in the second and third trimester. Okay? So that's one reason that they're morally worse, he would say, or more difficult to justify. Later in pregnancy, there's the possibility of living outside the womb. So again, here comes that idea of viability. Here comes the idea. Somehow the idea that there's viability, you could just take the baby out, pop it in an incubator, the mother can go in one direction, baby can go in the other. As soon as that's possible, somehow it's like, why kill it? Why kill it when you can just pull it out, pop it in the incubator, and let her go on her merry way? That just seems to be worse.
You know, the abortion business, Planned Parenthood, and doctors like George Tiller recognized Doe versus Bolton allows abortion in all 9 months of pregnancy. And we had that terrible case in Philadelphia where that doctor was doing late-term abortions. I had the privilege of being able to protest at an abortion clinic in Morrisville, New Jersey, where there were 15,000 partial birth abortions done every year when President Clinton said they were safe, legal, and rare. I have to object because I think we have far more late-term abortions than we are acknowledged.
Well, yes, I talked yesterday. We have 20,000 of them a year. We have 20,000 a year, but people don't like them. The general public doesn't like them, which was one of the reasons we got the ban on, pro-life got the ban on partial birth, because all of a sudden the public could see the baby's body. So we don't like partial birth abortions. Pro-life does not like partial birth abortions. And so the abortion industry said, fine, partial birth abortion is safer for the woman, but if you don't want to see the baby's body hanging outside, and you know, with the head, fine, we will keep it inside and do it all on the inside. So we got rid of partial birth abortion, but we didn't get rid of late-term abortion. But people in general, the general public, still does not like the idea of late-term abortion. And tomorrow night we'll talk about who is having those late-term abortions, because it's going to surprise you as to what demographic is having the late-term abortions. But the general public, you know, the general idea is that people don't like late-term abortions. And you'll hear people, you know, well-meaning people say, why did she wait so long? Why did she wait so long? You know, what was the problem here? So people do not like late-term abortions, including pro-choice people. General, well-meaning pro-choice people do not like late-term abortions any more than pro-life people. And I really saw that. I was actually surprised by that when I went to the Life and Choice Conference in Princeton. The huge consensus on the moral issue, not legally, because there's the issue of rights being taken back in the first trimester, but certainly on the moral issue, there was very little sympathy for somebody getting abortions after 20 weeks. And so Andrew Peach is on to something with that. And he says early in pregnancy, it's understandable that someone is ignorant or unaware of the status of the being in the womb, and women are certainly more easily misled. You know, we'll talk about this also on our last night, you know, women that are told it's a blob of tissue. Years ago, there were no sonograms, the literature wasn't out there, and then later they see a picture, and it's like, it has little feet. I'm going to talk about my dear friend who said to me, who saw a picture, it has little feet. Nobody told me it had little feet. They told me it was a blob of tissue. This poor woman was horrified. She believed it. Why did she believe it? Baby wasn't kicking. There was no movement. There was nothing. A little morning sickness. Morning sickness doesn't make a person. So there was a blob of tissue, she was told. And Andrew Peach says, in an early abortion, it's perfectly understandable that a woman could be lied to and misled, both by others and by herself. But at 20 weeks, at 16, usually around 16 weeks, you can start to feel the baby move. And by 20 weeks, baby is kicking. And he says, you can't be misled when something's kicking and rolling and hiccuping and making all kinds of movements in there. He says, he doesn't buy that. And I think everyone has a general idea of this. And again, I really want to stress that Andrew Peach is completely pro-life. He's completely pro-life from conception on. So I don't want you to misunderstand him that he's suggesting that early term abortions are great and wonderful and late term ones are horrible. He's not saying that at all, but he's saying there's a general understanding based on these three things that people have that something worse goes on later. And included in that, I think at this, I don't know if he mentions it, but I'm sure at this point he would also include, along with viability, the possibility of pain or the obviousness of pain, because we have preemies born, at 19 and 20 weeks, and they obviously experience pain. And we know even much earlier than this now that if you sweeten the amniotic fluid, the baby will drink more of it. You stick something bitter into the amniotic fluid, baby doesn't want anything to do with it. There's all sorts of things that like Suni Anand has done like that to see what kind of reactions. And those are happening very, very early. Those are happening very, very early. So Andrew wants us to take a look at this and say, at least we ought to move the legal situation back from these late-term abortions. I think that's what he's getting at. But again, this is important because this is common ground. And if you're pro-life people, you may be saying, well, that's not enough. But don't, what's the word I want? Don't think little of common ground in a controversial issue like abortion. Common ground is important. It's a starting place for people, well-meaning people who believe that life is really important no matter what the situation, and pro-choice people who believe happiness for women and born children in society is really important. There's well-meaning people on both sides of the issue. And if you can find a place for those people to dialogue, that's a starting point. So don't think little of the idea that, oh gosh, 20 weeks, that's halfway through pregnancy. That means half of the issue we all agree on. 99% of us agree on. That's an amazing starting point. Amazing starting point. So please keep that in mind. Please keep that in mind. Halfway through pregnancy, most pro-life people, all pro-life people, and most pro-choice people are in complete agreement. That's exciting. That's exciting. I left the Life and Choice Conference absolutely amazed that that was the case. Didn't expect to find that. So I don't want you to lose sight of that. Halfway through this issue, everybody agrees. 99.9% of the people, halfway through, everybody agrees. That's a starting point for dialogue. So here, 23-week, most people, Andrew Peach is saying most people at this stage of development, viability, obvious pain, we're talking about a preemie here, 23 weeks. So this is 3 to 4 weeks after preemies are born, almost a full month. Most people say that this is wrong. Most people have a problem with this, and rightly so. So I'm going to end there on a nasty picture. But it sounds, it's rough, but it's important that we have this common ground. Most people, most well-meaning people, both sides of the issue, whether this takes place inside, which is how it's being done now, or you flip the baby around, pull him out, well, no, you don't flip him around, you keep him here, pull him all the way out, but just keep the head inside, which partial birth does, which is safer for the woman. This is less safe for the woman, but we don't have to see it. So this is a diagram, there's no picture. We don't have to see it. I read an article some years back by an abortionist who did only late-term abortions. And he said even for him this was difficult. He said he had to pretend that he was taking apart a model airplane. And he would reach him and he would feel around and he would pull off one wing of the airplane and pull off another wing of the airplane. And that was how he got through it. Because he absolutely believed that women in difficult situations had the right to late-term abortions. So he felt he didn't like it. It was interesting. Even this abortionist said, I don't like doing late-term abortions. I feel it's a woman's right, but I don't like doing them. They disturb me. Having to yank arms and legs off of a fetus bothers me, but I get through it. I pretend it's an airplane that I'm pulling apart. Okay, but I get through it. But this is an abortionist saying I don't like it. It's disturbing. It's hard to go home and sleep at night after I do this. Okay? So most well-meaning people, even though those entrenched in it, don't like it. And that's a starting point for dialogue, believe it or not. Thank you.